Hi, I'm George Dow and have the great privilege of being co-chair of Green Christian alongside my fellow co-chair, Deborah Tompkins. It's really good to be here. So thanks so much to Staffan yet again for hosting these sessions and to all of you who have come along. Just a little bit about myself as introduction. I joined Green Christian about 15 years ago at a conference to celebrate the 25th anniversary of its founding. And I can honestly say that it has been absolutely central to my Christian faith journey from that day, and thankfully continues to be. I recall Deborah mentioning at one of her recent workshops that Green Christian was her tribe, and I know exactly what she meant. It is that for me too. After 40 years living and working in London, my wife and I moved to West Cornwall about 3.5 years ago. And I'm now very much involved in church life, in the music group, and on the PCC, and also in the Ecumenical Cornwall Churches Environment Working Group, and also paint and write and perform poetry as well. So I'm going to speak for a little less than I did for the first 3 sessions, probably about just under 20 minutes. And just a brief note on how I'll structure it. First of all, I'll introduce the way of life in general. Then I'll move on to the topic for this evening, which is encouragement and the resources which Green Christian provides to help us in that. And then finally, I'll look at what I've personally found to be particularly useful on this subject. So first of all, a few words on the way of life. This is the last of 4 Wednesday workshops which have been running between May and October on the way of life, each covering one of its 4 elements or spiritual disciplines. And those are prayer and devotions, living gently on the earth, public witness, and encouragement. I'm aware that there are some of you who may have already attended one or more of the workshops so far, and indeed I think I recognize everyone, and many of you are what we call companions of the way of life. But others, and particularly others who are maybe watching this on YouTube over the next few weeks and so on, others may not be aware of this, so I'll briefly explain what the Green Christian way of life is. Many spiritual communities have rules or ways of life, at the heart of which is a set of practices to assist believers in living out their faith in a deeper and more structured way. And well-known examples include the Iona community, the Northumbria community, the Third Order Franciscans, and there are lots more. And many Green Christian members already follow rules of life of other Christian communities, particularly the Third Order Franciscans. So why introduce a specific Green Christian way of life? Well, while many of the other organizations include care for creation in their rules, that's one of several elements. The Green Christian way of life arises out of what we feel is the need for Christian discipleship and spiritual formation in the 21st century to be informed by a lifestyle which nurtures God's creation, not destroys it. And so this way of life is offered to Green Christian members. It's not mandatory in any way. Green Christian members for whom care of God's creation in all its forms is a fundamental outworking of their faith, and who feel that they would benefit from having a structure to their creation care journey. And that's a calling for deeper engagement and shared encouragement. It's a way of life which focuses exclusively on creation care. And as many of you will know, companions are those who have made a commitment to follow the way of life. And explorers are those who have expressed an interest but don't yet feel able to make that commitment. And we currently have 64 companions in Green Christian. Okay, so that's an introduction generally to the way of life. Let's move on to the topic for this evening, which is encouragement. That's the fourth discipline. Now, what do I mean by encouragement? One of the many online definitions I've found for encouragement is this: the action of giving someone support, confidence, and hope. Support, confidence, and hope. Now, the Greek word for encouragement is parakaleo, and it's used in the New Testament to describe not only giving comfort to someone, but it also involves urging and strengthening. And of course, Christ does this continually with his disciples, and it's used a lot in Paul's letters. Here's 3 examples. In 1 Thessalonians, therefore encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing. 2 Corinthians, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us all in our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. Now, there's lots of comforting going on in that, but I think with comforting, we can almost certainly include the word encouragement as well. The final one, Ephesians chapter 4. I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. So as believers, we are called to encourage one another. But what does that encouragement look like for way of life companions? And how does Green Christian provide support to enable encouragement to happen sensitively and effectively? We do that in a number of ways, and again, some of you will be aware of this. For both companions and explorers, we provide a number of things. First of all, monthly letters, not newsletters, but personal stories from the author's recent experiences and reflections in their walk as companions. And we have 13 companions who do this. It's lovely. We do Zoom gatherings every 2 months, and we've been doing this for almost 18 months. And I've covered so far many, many topics. The importance of art and poetry in our journeys, moving from what we call the subversive into the mainstream, prayer and encouragement, the significance of stories, Lent reflections and actions, the role of non-violent direct action in protest, living gently on the earth. That's one of the other disciplines. Our most recent one was reflecting on the prospects for COP26, specifically on the themes of nature, climate justice, joy in enough, and hope. And the next one, which is on the 29th of November, will be on resilience, how we can stay resilient after COP26, no matter what the outcomes are. Now, in addition to all those Zoom things, we had, up until COVID, an annual gathering, which always happened at the end of January or the beginning of February. And that's a time where we met in London. And those gatherings were a great opportunity because we are a dispersed community of companions to get together and actually see each other outside the box on the screen. And just discuss stuff. And part of it was a workshop as well. And we had, how many did we have last time? Maybe about 45. It was wonderful. Yeah, so that's coming up. Hopefully that will happen in January 2022. So look out for that one. So that's what we produce, regular stuff for companions and explorers, and for companions only. That's those people who have made a commitment to follow these 4 disciplines. We've set up 16 regional encourager groups, possibly still via Zoom at the moment, but now groups can consider, I think, perhaps meeting up in person, but we'll see how it goes, because there were pretty bad news about COVID, I think, this afternoon. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm going to talk more about these regional encourager groups a bit later. Okay, so that's the topic. What do I personally find helpful? Because I know people find different things helpful, so I'm really speaking personally. The first thing I find helpful, I've tried to split it into a few numerical parts here. And the first one is about the certain knowledge that others are walking on the same footpath. Now, we may be in different places on that path. We may be walking at different speeds. We may be retreading footsteps which are not new to us, that we've been here before. Or this particular footpath may be new to us, and we're walking on fresh ground, stealthily putting one foot in front of the other, and maybe sometimes stumbling and falling down, or even getting lost. But on this journey, this existential Christian journey, where we are focusing on our place in God's creation, we know that we are not alone. And not only do we have God always with us and in everything around us, but also as companions in the way of life, we have each other. So when we stumble, which we surely will from time to time, that is part of the faith journey for many of us, there are always others who will help us along the way. That's the first thing, this certain knowledge that there are others walking in the same footpath. And just a personal reflection, which you may find helpful. And this is the second thing. Many years ago in the church which I then attended, I seemed, perhaps still like some of you, the only person in the church for whom the care of creation was important. At that time, I attended a big evangelical church which did wonderful things, but never really considered creation care as something which was important, at least not in a deep and active way. The vicar, bless him, recognized my deep concern and said that what I was experiencing was called prophetic frustration. Prophetic frustration. I'd never heard that named before. And there are lots of biblical precedents in this. Of course there are. You know, all those Psalms, you know, how long, Lord, must this go on? And the Lamentations and so on and so forth. And I've held on to that naming, prophetic frustration, over the past 3 decades. And I've found it immensely helpful to return to those words when I feel anxious about the lack of progress by governments and corporations and the lack of interest by other people. Frustrated, yes, but never despondent. The third thing I'd just like to point out is the companions have a common language. They don't have to explain to each other that creation care is one of our God-given tasks. That's already accepted. Instead, we can concentrate on sharing our experience of doing this, the how rather than the what. So empathy is present in all this. But that doesn't mean that we know how each other feel. That's not possible. We can't. But we can listen and feel each other's pain or joy. And how do we do this? By active listening. When companions are able to meet up, be that via Zoom breakout groups or in person, again, it's a God-given opportunity to intentionally and deeply listen to each other and authentically share feelings of vulnerability. So gone are those days when people ask you how you're feeling and you just say fine and move on. This is a time when, if you're not feeling fine, it's okay to say that, and know that you will have a listening ear around. Green Christian very much recognizes that feelings of anxiety need to be heard. Our Deep Waters program, and we're halfway through the third running of that program, is based on that, as was our recent retreat weekend in Suffolk. So the 4 things that I found helpful, there's lots more, but 4 for the purposes of this talk, are walking the path with others, the concept and reality of prophetic frustration, the common language of companions, and actively listening to each other and authentically sharing our hopes and concerns. And for those of us here tonight, or who are listening or watching this later, who are companions, I'd encourage you to continue, or in some cases simply begin, to meet up in your regional groups, either by Zoom or in person. Because the establishment of these groups are so important in the development of the way of life, as this isn't something coming from the so-called centre. This aspect of the way of life will only happen if companions themselves arrange to meet up. It's a great way to be there for each other. So don't wait for someone else in your group to start things off. You should all have the email addresses of at least some members, some other companions in your group. So take a deep breath, say a short prayer, and email them. I'm sure they'll be delighted to hear from you, and probably think, why didn't I do that? And one final thing which I will mention, although it may fit more accurately with the prayer discipline workshop that we did, back in May, is the importance, at least for me, of having a daily time of intentional silent reflection. Or it may take the form of, or you may call it, a meditation or a contemplation or a mindfulness session. And I find, yet again, and I've said this before, the morning emailed meditations from Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation, I find that hugely encouraging. And finally, in the earlier 3 workshops, I've held up to the screen at this point books and other material which I found to be helpful. I did this for each of the earlier disciplines: prayer, living gently, and public witness. I found it more difficult to come up with books which have been specifically helpful for encouragement, as all the earlier books have encouraged me. So today I sent Staffan a complete list of all the material I found helpful and all the material I referred to in the previous workshops. So Staffan will now have 2 pages of everything I found helpful in now the 4 Way of Life workshops, and they'll be made available to you. Thanks for doing that, Staffan, again. So that's been a quick run through, an overview of the way of life, resources which Green Christian provides in supporting that concept of encouragement, and a personal perspective, what's important in my own life. And I hope you found that helpful. And I'd be really interested to find out about what you have found helpful in your own lives. So thank you very much for staying with me in this. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, George. There's a lot there to think about. So why don't we open it up and hear some reflections back from people? What stands out for you that you'd like to raise, either a question or a thought or a reflection? I have one, George, which is that our society is going through quite a waking up process in terms of learning the language and beginning to understand some of these things about what's happening to us. Do you feel that, does that increase the sort of the level of informal companions, you know, the people or encouragers who are thinking about similar things? Or is there still a specific role for a really in the middle of it companion?
Okay. There's probably various ways of answering that question, and I'll try one. I attended, I think it was last week or earlier this week, I lose track. That was Monday, the Deep Waters session, the program I referred to that explores eco-anxiety in Green Christian. And in my breakout group, let me see, Angie might remember this because she was in my breakout group. I remember thinking that this period of COVID, I think that's what you're talking about, isn't it, Staffan? This period over the last, since COVID struck, is that what you meant?
It is COVID, but also there's the people are becoming, it's much more, since the last 2 years, the issue about climate is much more on people's radars and concerns.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I had in my head COVID, so I'm going to speak about COVID first of all, then I'll come on to that very briefly. I remember thinking that we had been talking about anxiety in that session, and how people share anxiety, because sharing anxiety is and joy is part of either receiving encouragement or giving encouragement. It's part of that dialogue. And I was thinking that COVID has been just been a horrible time, and it continues to be a horrible time for many, many people. But in a sense, it's kind of legitimized authentic communication and legitimized lamentation, if you like. You know, there's been so many people talking on television, on radio, amongst each other in meetings and on Zoom sessions about, you know, how awful things are. So they have been receiving encouragements, and they have been giving encouragement, and it's much more, rather than everyone saying they're fine and moving on. So that whole language of sharing how we're authentically feeling, I think, is important there. But you thank you for bringing it particularly to the climate crisis. Are people are certainly becoming more aware of it? Absolutely. One can't fail to be aware of it. I don't mean just because COP is coming up. You know, in the last few months, people are becoming more aware of it. I've seen David Attenborough on the screen even more than in past years, and people are talking about it. You know, did you see Prince William last night on Earthshot, and so on and so forth. People who would not normally talk about that. So yes, there is more conversation and awareness going on. Is there more authentic sharing going on? And in churches, are people talking about it and seeing it as a Christian imperative? A lot of churches are, but a lot of churches aren't. A lot of people are still very lonely in those churches. So I think there's a lot of work still to do, and there may be even more work to do after COP. We'll see how it goes. Sorry, that's a very long answer, but there you go. Yeah, further answers will be very, very short.
Good answer. Who else would like any more thoughts?
I'd love to hear what people feel about encouragement, and whether they feel that they do have people to talk to and listen with, and how that happens. I don't mean just for companions of the way of life. I mean for everyone here tonight.
That's very, very good. Yes, that'll be a good topic to hear from. Shall we go first to Lizzie as people think about that?
I hope you don't mind. I'm going back one step, but I'll try and be quick. It was just the prophetic frustration that's so helpful, George, because for me, I was so not green. Used to drive an MGF sports car, and it was at my church where I live in Hastings. God gave me a powerful picture of a triangle for the Trinity with the earth, and said to me, I'm crying because of what you're all doing to my earth. And I was sobbing afterwards, and then someone helped me who's been on the journey. But I don't feel my worship team leaders are on board really, but there was light at the end of the tunnel. I had a meeting with our curate in training, and he did a creation care Sunday. So it was a bit basic, and I posted it on Green Christian Instagram. And I find an outlet for me, which George also mentioned. God speaks a lot of my feelings into my artwork. So for me, that's been a comfort. But if I wasn't in Green Christian, I would feel very alone on this journey. So just want to thank you, really. It's amazing having this support, because I'm much newer to it than many of you. So yeah, having been able to come to these discussion groups and all hear what you've got to say.
And I'd like to just come in there and say what a support and breath of fresh air Lizzie has been. I don't know how many of you are on Instagram, but Lizzie is the one who we have to thank for getting us into Instagram, and she's just been an absolute blessing.
Oh, thank you.
Has thrown herself into that, and we're now pretty well represented, and she's doing some fantastic posts. So
thanks.
Pass that on to anybody you know who does do Instagram. Tell them to follow Lizzie, Green Christian, on Instagram. Thank you, Lizzie.
Thanks.
Thank you. So, other thoughts about the question of encouragement? Do you feel you get the encouragement you need? So Richard.
Yeah, I think I'm part of something called Climate Action in Leicester and Leicestershire, which is not a Christian organisation, is a secular organisation, and we've been organising silent vigils in the city centre in Leicester, and I've been quite surprised that we've had 30 and 40 people turn up just to stand with placards saying something about the climate crisis. And I think the sort of solidarity you get out of something like that, it's certainly been very encouraging for me.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you. Terry.
In the regional group, I think there were just 2 people and myself. The 2 were near Manchester, and I'm in Chester, and we've only had one sort of touching base together. Sadly, the physical distance is fairly large. But I mean, I get a lot of encouragement sort of locally with friends. I'm also in Northumbria community, and so have a weekly online meeting with some other people. So I'm not quite getting in the terms you've said, George, within the community, within Green Christian, but personally, I am getting encouragement. I'm a person on my own, so I do need encouragement. But with individual friends, a group Thursday evening, last Thursday we even had a meal together, which was pushing frontiers. And that, you know what, that was so beautiful, just to sit at the table from people and eat.
Yeah, we kind of take it for granted, don't you? All those you're just sitting and eating. We take for granted seeing someone in person. And of course, we've never really valuing these things. Terry, I really take your point about, sorry, motorbike. I really take your point about the regional groups. Green Christian is not an enormous organization, but really, I was going to say punches above our weights, but as a non-violent person, I wouldn't say that. But you know, we have the 64 companions at the moment, and they really are spread throughout England and Wales, really. And so, yeah, and also you're fortunate and are perhaps unfortunate, because one of the people in your group is very prominent and fantastic companion and really committed, is also a member of Christian Climate Action, and is obviously at the moment very much involved in Christian Climate Action. Mark Coleman, you know, fantastically inspiring. Yeah, I guess that's where Zoom starts to kick in, doesn't it? Really, when you've got someone in Chester, someone in north of Manchester, and someone in Manchester, whatever, it's difficult. We've got the same down here in Cornwall and Penzance. So my nearest companion is oh my goodness, this Ewan, and that's in Falmouth. That's quite a long way away. But anyway, yeah.
I think the church, which is a Methodist church, there's a climate action group, and we had an discussion last night. It's sort of a climate congregation, really. We've got a bronze award, so so there's a good number of people on the same journey, but not with the same labels.
I thought it was great to see, Anne, you mentioned about the Northumbria community and wanted to know more. And I think we should, if we don't cover it now, we should definitely cover it at 8 o'clock when people disappear, for those interested. But what I found there in Northumbria community, one of the great things about Northumbria is the Celtic kind of tradition, which connects with the earth and with the seasons and the connectivity. And so we're currently really benefiting from Forest Church in the Wye Forest here in the Midlands, and where we're a combined set of people who care about creation, and also the local Northumbria group. We get together once a month, and we just spend time in the forest, and we just worship, and we have sit spots, and we're quiet, and we look at some of those other liturgies, which is all about just reconnecting with nature. So a friend of mine, he's just taken his whole lawn and covered it with astroturf because it's easier. And somehow as humans, that reconnecting is really important, you know. So yeah, I mean, we could possibly cover it now, but I don't want to distract from encouragement. Possibly, Terry, we could ask you at 8 o'clock to just share a bit more about that for the benefit of those who are interested.
Do that.
I think it's a really good point to talk about actually other communities as well, because as I said in the talk, that lots of Green Christian members are members of other communities, and just thinking about the Forest Church one, it is a community. It's where people gather is a community, and where relationships form and develop is a community. And just to take that metaphor of the footpath that I talked about, we're going at different speeds and so on, and perhaps falling over and being picked up. I would say that's a parallel footpath. It's using it's in the same area. It's like being in the same vegetation, the same soil, because it's about care for the earth as well. So that's why there is never and never will be any hint of the Green Christian Way of Life community being somehow, I don't know, we're certainly not hierarchical in any way, and we certainly don't feel ourselves to be more spiritual than anyone else. And in fact, I could say that I really need it, because I find I need structure, whereas perhaps other people don't need structure quite so much. I need to know what I should be doing, and that's one of the reasons why I got involved in it, and it's kind of helped me in that way. But if you find that in other communities, then that's absolutely really. And we've learned a lot from looking at other communities as well. I've been up to Lindisfarne. Jacqueline is a member of the community of Aidan and Hilda, just across the water from Northumbria, and also we've been up to Iona, and we've learned so much, and we'll probably be going back to Iona in the next 2 years. So, yeah. Yeah, it doesn't matter which community, as long as you're getting what you need in your spiritual journey.
Any more thoughts about that, and sort of where do you get encouragement from, and what are your reflections? Do you get enough, and how can you develop that? Any more thoughts?
Jill's got her hand up.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Jill, go for it.
I'm sorry I'm late, actually. Did you start at 7?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
boy. So yeah. Well, I've come in at the very end, obviously, and I'll catch up on, but yeah, Green Christian has been lifeblood for me in terms of feeling that I'm not alone in sort of all of this. And recently I've got involved with the local Eco Hub group where I live. And it's been really affirming to mix with people that are passionate about climate change and doing something about it, who sadly aren't Christians, but they share that concern. So I've had Green Christian, offering lots of input, and also meeting other people, and another community that I'm sort of dipping my toes into at the moment, and that's the Nazareth community. I don't know if anyone has heard of that at St Martin in the Fields, and it's and I'm really very drawn to that, but I'm also very conscious that I haven't really got enough time to be involved with too many groups, because then you don't seem to be doing either or any of them particularly well. So perhaps, I value your prayers, because I feel committed to Green Christian and the way of life for companions and so on, but I'm not sure if I can take on another commitment, because I think that could spread myself too thin. But I'm very drawn to it, because and one of the key things is a Saturday morning walk, and that's between 8 and 9 o'clock, and they walk somewhere, and they're guided meditations, and you just log into Facebook, St Martin in the Fields, Nazareth community, and you can join in. And for me, you mentioned Zoom. I'm a wheelchair user, and I'm not. It's not very easy for me to go and stay anywhere else anymore. So the fact that we do all this by Zoom is particularly meaningful for me, because I would miss out on so much. So thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Just thinking also about we have something coming up in Glasgow quite soon, and yes. COP26, yes. And just thinking about, well, we don't know what the outcomes are going to be, but I think it's so important to just keep going. We keep going and being resilient, because it's the right thing to do. Barbara, I hope you don't mind me mentioning, Barbara, you mentioned this, I think, in Monday. Oh, you may want to mention it now. Do you want to talk a little bit about not looking to be successful, but doing it because it's the right thing to do, and thereby encouraging others?
Well, this would resonate with those of you who've been on this journey for 3 decades, like I have been, and for most of them with my lovely husband, Ed. You just got used to not getting anywhere, people not listening. And I guess you would either just stop and join the crowd, or you just had to think, well, okay, we're not in this to win. We're beating our head against a brick wall, but never mind. It may not be making any impact, but it's the right thing to do. So you just keep on going. And there's another phrase we use, sort of just dogged determination, It doesn't work for everybody, but if you're in something for the long haul and you're not succeeding, but you're quite sure that what you're doing is important and what you're saying is true, then I think that's that sort of resilience you've got to have. Otherwise, you just wouldn't keep going. And even now, while so many people are finally realizing that the problems we've caused, both with the climate and ecological emergency, it's still, of course, hugely frustrating that our government is just not doing enough about it. Just today, the Environment Bill, a very, very important bill that is going through Parliament, getting towards its last stages, the House of Lords put in a couple of amendments that would have strengthened protection for the UK's biodiversity. The government today, in their infinite wisdom, has decided not to throw them out, not to accept those two amendments. So even though many, many people are now with us and know how important this is, we're still having to cope with not getting the results that we hope we should get. And so resilience becomes a very important part of what we need to have in order to keep going. And that's where, having friends like amongst you guys here tonight with Green Christian and the other groups that you've talked about, it is so important for all of us to think that we're not alone. And others are agreeing with us and sharing this with us. Sorry, I went on too long, sorry.
No, that was great. Thank you very much. That's great. Marisa.
I was very encouraged this lunchtime. I happened to hear the 39 Ways to Save the Planet on BBC4. I mean, I usually tape it, but I was listening to it live, and it was all about floating solar. Now, I've been going on about concentrated solar power for as long as Barbara's been going along about things too. And I've recently become very interested in the idea that you could have marine solar power stations floating out at sea, a hybrid system with wind farms. So when the wind isn't blowing, the sun is shining. So you have more or less continuous energy. And this one wasn't about that. They hadn't really thought that marine solar was yet completely viable, but it was about floating solar on reservoirs. And for example, in the Bay of Bengal in Bangladesh, where there isn't very much land, people are losing the land to the sea. And so they could have these floating solar panels to power them. And I found that so encouraging, because I'd sort of read about this and researched it and even done a painting with it. And to actually find it on Radio 4, I found very encouraging.
Elizabeth, you had your hand up for a moment. Have you something to share with us? You're on mute at the moment. Elizabeth, you're on mute.
Sorry, I hadn't meant to have my hand up, but I was going to say, I don't know whether I missed the beginning, I'm sorry.
No problem.
But I went to a talk by Jonathan Porritt yesterday. I don't know anyone's mentioned having been there, but I mean, he sadly is fairly, well, not very optimistic about things going as well as they need to at COP, which, and I guess he knows possibly more than a lot of us do, because he's just written a book called Hope in Hell, which I haven't bought yet, but anyway, yeah, I hadn't meant to interrupt, so sorry about that.
No problem, no problem. So speaking personally, I'm finding that even the preliminary COP news has an emotional roller coaster impact on me. When I hear something that is a bit, it sets me down and it puts me in a hole. And so I realize that I am really tied to what's going on there in a bigger way than, in a sense, yes, we should be, but it's having a massive impact on me. I'm sort of stuck to, does it go well, doesn't it? Is there a good comment on Radio 4 or is there a negative? And then I'm up and down. And I think one of the key things that, as I've been praying through this, and I'm Ignatian spiritual exercises, working with the imagination, so sitting with Jesus on a hill of desolation and talking to him about things that hurt as well as the joy of creation, is that the first and foremost thing is that I have to trust. But that's not a trusting to, just leave it all to God. I have to live the love as well. So I have to trust in God that he is bringing all things together for good. And I do trust in that. but actually that means holding on when it's tough and when there's no response. And it means continuing as a disciple to live the love. And that is that Christ loves everything and everyone and is bringing all. And that's what we're called for.
I've just been speaking to my 92-year-old father, who's very down about what's going on in the world and just really struggling with it. And I think, when elderly people, particularly living on their own, who are interested in the world and interested in these issues and take notice of what's being said on the radio and on the news and whatever, it can be a very lonely place to be when your heart's breaking and you've got no one to really share it with. And at 92, he barely can do emails, let alone, tackle anything like Zoom. He just wouldn't be able to do that. So it's, I think, it's right that we realise that so many people now are really heavily personally affected by this, and it does exact quite a toll on you. I mean, for us at our church, it's lovely because this Sunday there's a little group of us leading the service, and it's all about environmental things, climate change, and biodiversity loss and whatever. And so at least that feels that we're doing something sort of positive in amongst all the doom and gloom, which is yeah. And what my dad said is, you just have to believe that God's with us, and you just have to put your hand into the hand of God and know that He's holding your hand.
That's right.
And having faith.
And it's easy for us to lose that. I mean, we have a gospel of hope and real life, and we can't understand and control these things. We just have to do what we're called to do, and trust.
Well, if we as humanity get this right at the very last minute, and we do manage to avert the very worst of what we're in progress of doing, that would mean such a transformation in the way of life of the planet, of human beings interacting with one another, nation on nation and individual with individual, that it could be a blissful transformation in the end into life more like God planned for us. So that is something to hope for.
Thank you very much. George, have you any comments?
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. I was listening intently to what you were saying there, and also thinking at the same time about the way of life. Not that I'm selling the way of life in any way, but this how it fits together, the elements fit together, and what is that calling us to do? Prayer is the first element, and that's what we continue to do. Living gently in the earth, which is how we try to live as gently as we possibly can, given the context in which we live and given the limitations that we have. Public witness, so that's really about talking about it, whether it's talking about to your MP or whether it's talking with others. Maybe it's getting involved in saving a wildflower meadow or whatever. It's just, having worked yourself, having spoken and listened with God, and then tried to change one's own life or adapted it in some way, and then stepping out of the front door, if you like, and saying, well, what publicly, what can I do here? And I'm sure we're doing all of these things. And then that final one, that really, really key one, which is encouragement. It's because it's so much easier to do that with other people. It's easy. We mentioned the word resilience after COP. That would be hard if you're feeling all those things and you're on your own and you don't have anyone to talk to or listen to. And so it's so much easier to do it together. And I think that's where encouragement really, really is so very, very important. But you're right, you know, all we are called to do, as in my simplistic analysis of my Christian faith, my calling, is to love, is to show love and kindness and courage and, yes, fight injustice. But it's really about love and kindness and empathy and encouraging each other. For me, anyway, it's probably much more important, other things as well, but that's what it is for me. So thank you for mentioning those words, love and kindness and encouragement and so on. That's a big part of what I feel I'm called to do anyway.
Lizzie?
It just to say also resonated, you were talking about prayer, and I think the relationship with the Lord, because we can get bogged down in all the doing and end up taking our eyes off Jesus. And that's been a great comfort to me. And I felt the Lord say, take joy in the Lord. And once a week I go out now somewhere to a gardens or a park or to be out. And I haven't got a car, but I get myself there, take the dog, and just really connecting with nature. And it keeps me going, actually. And it lifts, I sometimes go with friends, and I find it lifts our spirits. I've got a friend who's in XR with me, and so we go and do some of these trips, and I think it's really important. I try and do that with the Instagram because it's quite unpalatable, some of the stuff I'm sharing, balancing it with positive projects, nice artworks, wood carvings, pictures of, you know, wildflower meadows, and I know it can be hard to do, but I think that trusting in the Lord and taking joy in creation is really important.
Yeah, so valuable. Thank you.
Any more? Feels like we're coming to a natural end.
I've kept very quiet in all of this because I'm probably in a different space. So I'm a Russia partner in action, and we met together, and there's this point about talking to others and getting encouragement from others. But I also then have this sense of the huge agenda that's in front of me. If I have this lovely piece of land, A, there's forest school and it's going on all the time, and B, what more can I do with the land to make it more ecologically sound? So that's why I haven't been better at Green Christian, but I've loved the conversation tonight and found it very encouraging to get me back on track.
That's lovely to hear, Anne. Thank you. And it's lovely to see you again as well.
Indeed.
My son in Wales, in West Wales, runs a forest school as well. So, yeah.
I mean, it is wonderful. And unless you keep your eye on it, children will have fun. They'll enjoy the natural world. But also just see if we can get that little bit of teaching in there. Not that you're not supposed to actually teach, but nonetheless, imparting awareness.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm now going to read the closing blessing. So let's pray. May our loving God, who created the world and all that is in it, inspire us to delight in our beautiful home and to live in wonder, peace and joy. May our living God keep our hearts turned to loving our neighbour and to respecting the creation we share. May our merciful God help us to live this week in goodness and hope, and fill us with God's peace. Amen.
Amen.